Hey, what's up? It's Mr. Spencer. I'm here to talk about F. Scott Fitzgerald's Bernice Bobs Her Hair. Okay, this is the author of The Great Gatsby. This story was published about 5 years before The Great Gatsby, but it'll help us get familiar with the writing style of Scott Fitzgerald with this capital M modernism period that we've looked at on the blue paper through those American literary movements. We read In Another Country by Ernest Hemingway. Scott Fitzgerald and Ernest Hemingway were good friends. Okay, Fitzgerald and Hemingway were rivals, and Hemingway was actually pretty jealous of Fitzgerald's writing talent. They have very different writing styles, but they were friends and rivals of the time. And and Hemingway, when The Great Gatsby came out, Hemingway was so jealous and just like envious of how good a book The Great Gatsby was that Hemingway spent the rest of his career sort of lashing out and sort of being sort of mean in public quotes about Fitzgerald because he wished he could have written a book as good as The Great Gatsby. All right, so this time period, the 1920s, the roaring 20s, lots of new technology, lots of new taller skyscrapers. Alcohol was prohibited. However, at the time in big cities like New York and Chicago, they actually had much more alcohol access because it got cheaper. Okay, if stores weren't selling it legally, people started selling it, bootlegging it, and they were selling it like illegally under the counter, and they'd go into speakeasies, these secret little bars. Okay, so alcohol actually got much more widespread in areas like Chicago and New York. And the bootlegging idea came from they would walk into a bar or a public place, but they weren't allowed to have alcohol. So next to their boot, I got a Nike here. But if they had boots on, they would tie a flask or attach a flask full of secret alcohol to their boot. Their bootlegged alcohol. Okay, literally, that's where the word came from. So this was a pretty party, raucous, wild time period. And it ends up crashing in 1929 with the stock market crash, a lot of people losing their jobs, leading into the 1930s and the American Great Depression. So this story was 1920, early on in Fitzgerald's career. This is when he was trying to meet and court and marry a girl named Zelda. All right, yes, the Legend of Zelda video game. Shigeru Miyamoto, who created Mario and Zelda, he created this after the character of Zelda, who was F. Scott Fitzgerald's eventual wife. He couldn't marry her at first because apparently she didn't want to marry this guy, Scott Fitzgerald, because he wasn't rich enough, didn't have enough money, couldn't buy her a fancy diamond ring. So after a few unsuccessful attempts to get engaged, finally, he published his first book, This Side of Paradise. It started selling like hotcakes. And finally, when he made that money, she's like, all right, we'll get married. She was from Montgomery, Alabama. Okay, they do have a house there in Montgomery, Alabama. It's like a museum now. Okay, right there in the middle of Montgomery, Alabama. And if I zoom out, you'll see where is Alabama. It's in the south, so it's near Florida and Georgia, that Florida-Georgia line, and that's the F. Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda Museum, the house that they ended up buying later after they got married. So why are we talking about Zelda Fitzgerald? Well, she was like an inspiration, an artist, and a muse that Scott Fitzgerald, our author, was very inspired by. And he was trying to win her over and woo her, trying to gain favor with her and impress her with his great writing and a lot of money he could make from his great writing. Now, one weird thing about Zelda is she first got the attention of people in Montgomery, Alabama by going to some of those local watering holes. They'd go swimming out there, and in this national pastime of swimming, she wore a one-piece flesh-colored bathing suit, people said. And people growing up around her said when she was only about 16 or 17, she would wear a flesh-colored bathing suit, like skin-colored. Do you know what I mean? It gave the impression that she was swimming naked. She scandalized the town and got people's attention like Scott Fitzgerald. Okay, why am I talking about swimming in water? Well, this is a very common motif in The Great Gatsby and Bernice Bobs Her Hair. If you look at the beginning of the story, you're actually going to see right away that the story has an ocean metaphor at the beginning. We start off at a golf course. It's like a rich, fancy country club, but the people on this country club that are about to watch a dance happen, a bunch of teenagers dancing, the people at this country club are described as waves. We get a metaphor as they're compared to waves. And who are these waves, so to speak? They were the heads of caddies, because it's a golf course. Caddies are the people carrying the golf clubs for the rich people, and a couple other chauffeurs. The chauffeurs are people that drive around the golf carts in the fancy limousines for these rich people. This is what we're calling lower class. There's a middle class and an upper class, like these rich people that have a membership to the country club. But the lower class people down here, sometimes it's called the servant class. Okay, they might work on tips, they might make a minimum wage, but the chauffeurs are described as people that aren't supposed to talk, they're not supposed to listen, they're supposed to be silent, seen but not heard. So Fitzgerald makes a little joke here, not literally deaf, but he says the chauffeurs, these drivers, these are the golf players' deaf sister. Okay, that's a metaphor. He's making a little clever joke. The other waves strolling in are watching this dance between the teenagers there. So the waves and the ocean metaphor that starts the story is a very common watery, wavy motif that Fitzgerald uses all the way through The Great Gatsby and short stories like Bernice Bobs Her Hair. Fitzgerald loved swimming, and he loved going swimming with Zelda. It was one of his favorite pastimes with her. Okay. Now, they were the it couple, super famous. They were like Bieber and Selena Gomez, Mac Miller and Ariana Grande. Now, Pete Davidson and Ariana Grande. I don't even know who she's dating anymore. Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie. Do you know who they are? Kim and Kanye. I don't know. They were the it couple. A super famous writer and his famous artistic wife in the magazine covers, people taking their pictures, all that red carpet type of jazz. All right, so super famous, Hemingway a little jealous, but Ernest Hemingway, author of In Another Country, author of The Old Man and the Sea, Hemingway was friends with them. But like I said, they were also competitive rivals. So as they got money, they spent money. They didn't save it. Some of it was also debt and credit that they started accumulating because credit cards were invented in the 1920s. Okay. Zelda was a flapper. She was rebellious. She scandalized older women who thought this is not how a woman should act in public. Smoking and drinking in public, dancing close to other men in public, that's not how a woman should act. Okay. So that's some of the background on Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald. Okay. She broke the mold of what traditional women in bathing suits were supposed to look like back then, showing more skin, flesh-colored bathing suits that she'd wear. That's not a picture of a flesh-colored bathing suit. I couldn't find one that was black and white from the 1920s. But you get the idea of how traditional some of the bathing suits for men and women were back then. Okay, in the next video, I'm going to summarize the story and talk a little bit about how we can follow the plot, conflict to the climax to the resolution of Bernice Bobs Her Hair. All right, thanks for watching. Next video, we'll summarize the story if you need it.